Okay, I'm Mike Kelly and with me is Atom McGregor from 2Shakes, and today's webinar we're going to be talking about ongoing customer due diligence and renewals. Now before we begin, we always do this, we just got to remind you that this is an opinion and we hope our opinion can help. It's not advice, it doesn't make us liable, and you should always refer to the legislation, the information and advice provided by your AML supervisor, and obviously your AML program and your AML compliance officer. But we'll do our best to help. Thanks. Now, what we're going to cover today, part one, we're going to look at ongoing customer due diligence for AML, and that's going to cover things like the biometric IDV and how things have changed along there, any changes to company's office, and doing ongoing PIP checks, and we're going to do a demonstration using AML only. Now, if you only do AML only, feel free to jump out at that point. Part two is going to include sign up in AML, so we're going to show agreement renewals, talk about government authorities, that sort of thing, and do a bunch of stuff on that. If you only do AML only, feel free to stay for the whole thing, it's all good, but the first part will cover specifically ongoing customer due diligence, and the second part we're just going to talk a little bit about how that fits in with your renewals. Then we'll have some Q&A and talk about some further resources as well. So, part one, ongoing customer due diligence for AML. So, this is a little bit what is ongoing customer due diligence and why are we doing it. We're going to talk about the guidance change that happened back in July, where the supervisors just updated their guidance, updated the explanatory note, and for us, biometrics very much becomes the new normal in terms of how you ID verify people. Then we'll look at beneficial owner changes, which will be a big part of your ongoing customer due diligence. That might be through the company's office changes. There might be changes in trusts, like trustees changing through a variation, that type of thing. We'll also talk about keeping your PEP checks current so that you know that your customer hasn't become a politically exposed person in the meantime. And then we're going to do a demonstration on ongoing CDD using the AML only, as I said, and we'll have some questions and answers at the end. So, ongoing customer due diligence. Now, the idea with this is that you're regularly reviewing the business relationships and the transactions you have with your customer to make sure that they're consistent with the due diligence that you've done and crucially the risk assessment that you've carried out for your client. So you're basically reviewing what you're doing for them, how you're doing it, who owns the company, the nature and purpose, the risk assessment, all of that type of stuff that's in 2Shakes. You're reviewing all of that and making sure all your customer due diligence and you know your customer records are all up to date. It is a legal requirement, obviously, for AML reporting entities to carry out ongoing customer due diligence. That's Section 31 of the Act. And it's to ensure, like I say, that you understand your customer still, that you still know your customer, you understand who owns or benefits from it, and where their risks are. It's important to mention you do ongoing customer due diligence for customers that you have an ongoing business relationship with. If you had a one-off transaction with somebody, or if you had an ongoing relationship and that's now finished, obviously for those people you don't have to do ongoing customer due diligence. It's just for the people you've got an ongoing relationship with. So your AML program should talk about what triggers ongoing customer due diligence, and it's something that you should really look into. There are triggers that can happen through material change, and that's something I'm sure you're all aware of, and the DIA has some really good information on what constitutes a material change. But if you think of it as something that might change the way that you assess the risk or the risk assessment that you did for your client, you won't be far wrong. So a material change could trigger doing ongoing due diligence on your customer. Other than that, you would also look at reviewing your customer due diligence periodically, and this again should be in your program. So even if you haven't, even if there hasn't been a material change, there might be something where you say for instance, and it's purely as an example, for instance, every 3 years, you might decide to redo your standard due diligence clients. And it might be that for your high risk or your enhanced due diligence clients, you decide to do ongoing due diligence every year for them. So that's something that should be in your program, and you just need to follow what your program says in terms of what triggers it for you. Now, you got to make sure your CDD is current and it's to an acceptable standard. And those standards change, as I mentioned. A big change really was that guidance back in July, and we're going to go into that a bit more. Other changes in the relationship, other changes in beneficial ownership, is the risk profile still the same? And we'll look at the PEP checks as well and making sure that they're all up to date. So this change that I was talking about with the ID verification, it comes down to an explanatory note from in the ID Code of Practice, and the explanatory note was updated back in July, and it's much more explicit about the additional measures that you need to take to link a claimed identity with the person who's claiming it. Now, when we went into the DIA and we discussed with them how 2Shakes works and what people would do with it and how that meets the new guidance, it was pretty clear, and we sent an email out on this in August. And if you haven't got that, feel free to just let me know and I'll send it through to you. But the DIA were just saying, basically, if you did a standard electronic ID verification in 2Shakes previously, when you were doing your ongoing due diligence, then you should look to up that to a biometric ID verification. Or if you've met them in the meantime and verified their ID in person, then you should make a note of that in the update. So basically, that's for us very much meeting the new explanatory note is very much doing a biometric, and that's why the biometric is now the default in 2Shakes when you do a new client, and it will upgrade automatically anything to biometric that wasn't previously. When you're doing your ongoing customer due diligence in 2Shakes, we help by looking at what you did previously and then showing you what we think you need to do this time. So if you did a standard, we will say you need to do a biometric, or we recommend it will default to a biometric. If you did a biometric previously, we'll say it's okay to keep that biometric, but you just need to redo the PEP check. So we've got all of that sort of stuff built in there to help you. You can still make your own decisions and override the defaults. It's just there to help you meet the guidance as it is. And we also mentioned in that email about updating your program. So there's a couple of little bits that you needed to update your program, just in terms of talking about biometric for a start, in terms of what you accept for ID, but also what you were going to do for ongoing due diligence. So as I said, if anybody doesn't have that email, please let me know and we'll get it through to you. So one of the big things when you're doing your ongoing customer due diligence is looking at your beneficial ownership changes. Now, at company's office, and we already, obviously, when you're doing your first AML customer due diligence, we look if it's a company at the company's office structure, and we immediately show you who are the directors and who are the people who have an effective 25% or over. Those are the beneficial owners that we automatically detect for you. When you're doing ongoing customer due diligence, we go back to company's office and we will pull through the current state of play in terms of directors and ownership, and we will show you that against the previous one. And there might be some people who need to go, and there might be some people who need to be added, but we show you that, and we'll show you that during the demo. So we're doing that company's office check of beneficial ownership of the company. The other thing that you can do manually is if you know that there's a change of trustee or a change of beneficiary of a fixed trust, and the beneficial owners in a trust or a partnership or any other entity that is your client, then you can still update the beneficial owners. You can add people, you can remove people, and you're just bringing it up to date as part of your due diligence to make sure that the beneficial owners that you've got on your system and you've got ID verified are current for you. Now, as I said, you can also carry out the IDV and the PEP checks on any of those new beneficial owners, as well as just the PEP checks on the existing. So politically exposed persons and sanctions checks, as you know, when we do an electronic or biometric, we always do the PEP check electronically at the same time. When it comes to doing ongoing customer due diligence, you still want to do the PEP check. So you're still going to do a PEP check of each of your clients. Now, coming back to those permutations again, if you'd previously done a biometric ID, we're only going to redo the PEP check. If you'd previously done a standard and you choose to do a biometric, or you'd previously done a manual and you choose to do the biometric, we will include that PEP check at the same time. So just remember, this is the time for doing PEP checks as well. And obviously, if there's new beneficial owners, their PEP checks will be included in the electronic or biometric ID verification. So that's kind of what happens when you're doing your ongoing due diligence. You're really looking at all of the things that you know about your customer, the things you're doing for them, all of that due diligence that you previously did, your nature and purpose, your risk assessment, the beneficial owners, and you're just making sure that it currently reflects the situation between you and your client. And we're going to show you what that looks like in 2Shakes now, just by doing a demo. We're going to look at the OCDD report, which will show us which customers we should be doing ongoing customer due diligence for, say in that month. It's the sort of thing that you would run at the beginning of each month and see who you need to do this month. Then we're going to add a new director of a company. We're going to look through the nature and purpose and risk assessment. We'll redo some IDs and biometrics depending on what we had chosen last time, and I'll just cover some different scenarios there, and we'll be redoing the PEP checks. So let's get into that demonstration now. So I've moved over now to the 2Shakes training environment. You guys should see that okay. It's a little bit tidier than it used to be. We've got rid of the peachy pink background, and it's just got this blue bar now that says training. And I'm just in my dashboard as normal. Now you'll see I've prepared in advance a couple here. There's Team IM Limited. That was an AML only, and there's also a Renew Limited, and it's a sign up in AML. So for this first demo for the AML only, we're going to be using Team IM, but I'll show you how we're going to find that. So if we go to AML Ongoing Customer Due Diligence, Ongoing CDD, and it's going to bring up the Ongoing CDD report. Now this is going to show me all of the clients whose CDD has not been reviewed for a specific amount of time, and it starts at 3 months. And there's a few other switches that we can use in terms of only show me things that are high risk or enhanced, or where I haven't done a PEP or whatever. So we won't worry about too much about those switches. Just be aware they're there and have a look into them. If you need to know anything further about that, just do let us know and we'll happily go through them. So for the purposes of this, I'm just going to say show me all my due diligence clients that I haven't looked at and haven't updated in more than 24 months. And if I search that, it'll just take a couple of seconds. Lo and behold, we can see Renew and Team IM. Now I'm going to go into Team IM. I know that's my AML only. It just takes us to the previous record that shows me the management page for this. It shows me it's complete, who the client was. Now you can see there were 3 people who were ID verified. I've done one biometric, one electronic and one manual, so that we're going to cover the range of options so that I can show you each. Each of them were done, and the ongoing due diligence are marked as complete on the 1st of January 2019. Now I mentioned before about customers needing to be having an ongoing business relationship with you if you're going to be doing ongoing customer due diligence. If you don't have an ongoing relationship with them and you don't want them to show up in that OCDD report anymore, you can just click Disable Ongoing CDD and it won't show in the report anymore. So it's really that simple. You can just disable it and say, I no longer have an ongoing relationship with that client. I don't have to worry about them for ongoing CDD. I still have to keep the records for a minimum of 5 years for AML, for my auditing. I still need to report on them at the end of this year if it was something that I had done then. So all of those things you still have to do, but you don't have to continue to do ongoing due diligence. So in this case, I can have a little look through my existing due diligence. There were 3 people that were ID verified. And if I remind myself by going through, I can have a quick look and I can see I did some nature and purpose statements. I put in my risk assessment information. And in this case, I've just picked a more difficult one where you can see there's over 25% in the Hamptis Trust. By the way, I'm just doing this as a complete pretend. I've pulled a company at random from Company's Office and I'm just using it as a demo. So none of this is real. Okay. So I've put in Hamptis Trust there with an address and as a discretionary trust. So we did some due diligence on the trust as well, and we added Joan Trustworthy as the trustee. So I'm just going to go back through now and do my ongoing due diligence. When you do ongoing due diligence, it creates a new record in 2Shakes and it links it to this one. So let's get going with that. Perform ongoing CDD, and I can click that. That's immediately going to put a notice into the notes and files on this one to say this client has now been renewed, the due diligence has been renewed on this date. So that will show up in the notes on this one so that it'll link to the next one. And when I hit proceed, it launches basically a new 2Shakes straight through to the AML due diligence page. And there's a few things here, and I'm just going to kind of go through them with you. These are the 3 people who we originally ID verified. That was the original people for IDV. The Company's Office search has found these 3 people. If you remember, Joan Trustworthy are added manually as a sample of a trustee. But these are the 3 people Company's Office say should be beneficial owners. Yeah, and I can see that Ian and Volker I've already done, but Craig I hadn't, so it's added Craig automatically, and I'm now going to have 4 people for IDV. So that's that change at Company's Office. What we did was we looked at who had been done previously, we looked at what the current search is, and we've said, you know what, it's not just these people anymore, we also need to do Craig. So we've added that in automatically. The add more still exists. You can go in there and add additional people, and the show more still exists to show people with lower than 25% of the shareholdings. So that all happens for the people for IDV. The shareholdings, it will pull through what they are currently so that you can still see them. It creates a copy of the due diligence level, the nature and purpose, the risk assessment, and you can go through that and edit it. So I would be having a look at this and saying, yep, I'm all good. I might have a look at the company structure and say, yep, work my way through that. That's all looking good. I'm happy that I'm capturing everything. Look at my previous nature and purpose statement, and I might come in and put in a few other things that we might be doing for this client, or a few interesting things that have changed in the meantime. The risk assessment, previously I said all my risk assessment info would be here. There were no red flags. It's assessed as low. I might just put in something that says OCDD still low, no change. So something along those lines. So just sort of showing that I've actually been through it and done any updates that are necessary. And then I would go into the trust tab and just make sure I'd be talking to the client because it's a trust. I didn't mean to make this a complicated one, but because it's a trust, I'd be just asking them, have you had any variations to the trust in the last 3 years or whatever? Are there new trustees being appointed? Have some of the trustees come off? Just find out any of that stuff. And if there are, I'd update here, and I would be adding a person for ID verification, and that would add them up the top. So it's just making sure that you've got a good understanding of who all those beneficial owners are. Once we've done all of that, I'll just hit proceed. And we're going to go to the proceed page, right? Now, this page is a little bit different to what it was previously. We've now got, we can still see the customer before, but we've now got people with existing identity verification and people for ID verification only. These are people that we've added. And as you know, we had added Craig, and we're going to, it just defaults, this is what it normally look like. I would just put in an email address there. I'll just put in mine for argument's sake. Now, on this, we can see Ian, Joan, and Volker were all ID verified previously before we did this ongoing customer due diligence. And what we've done is we've said, this is what you did last time, and this is what therefore the system thinks you should do this time. Now, because Ian was last time a biometric with electronic, this time we're saying keep the biometric, that still meets the guidance from July from the supervisors, but redo the PEP check. So the default for if it was done a biometric last time is keep the biometric but redo the PEP. Joan was done manually last time, so we're saying this time, look, do a biometric and do the PEP as well, which is included with the ID verification. The same with the electronic. So with the electronic for Volker, he was electronically verified, and now we're saying that electronic might not meet the new guidance unless we've met him and taken copies of his details in the meantime. Then we should be doing a biometric and upgrading to the latest guidance from the supervisor. Now, so that automatically happens. If for whatever reason you decide, oh look, I don't want to do it that way, say for instance Joan was somebody you were quite comfortable, you were happy to do it all manually, and you were very happy with the way you've done it manually, what we could then say is edit, and it brings up this little box that says edit what the defaults are. So the defaults here is to redo the IDV, and we're going to send an email, but I'll say actually no, I won't redo the IDV. I can redo the PEP check because it was an electronic, so I'm saying here I'm happy with the manual, I'm just going to redo the PEP check. And I save that, and it updates that to keep manual and redo the PEP check. So if you want to do that and use these edits to change them, that's absolutely fine. I'll just leave it at that, and we'll say we'll proceed, and I'll show you what it quickly looks like. For Ian, we're keeping the biometric and redoing the PEP. For Joan, we're keeping the manual, redoing the PEP. And for Volker, we're updating from an electronic to a full biometric. And Craig, who's new, is going to be doing a biometric from scratch. And when I hit proceed, this takes us through to the management page here. Ian and Joan are fine because with Ian, we kept the biometric and we've redone the PEP for him. So if I went in there, you would see that the PEP check has now been done anew, and we kept the biometric that he had. Exactly the same for Joan. Because we had previously done an electronic PEP check, we've now redone that and we've kept the manual ID. For Volker and for Craig, we have sent biometric email out for a biometric ID that is now pending. And when they get completed, we would then just go down to the due diligence and say that it's completed as you normally would. So that all works really nicely. And if I just jump into my dashboard, you'll see that the Team IM, this AML here, is linked to this AML here. This one's complete, this one's AML in progress. And if I click on there, I can see and go to the one that I really need to have a look at. And if I go back to that AML in progress, I just manage that through as if it's a normal customer due diligence. I've got a few people to ID verify, and all my other notes and files are still on there exactly as they would be normally. So that really gives you an idea of how we've taken the way we normally work in 2Shakes and do work through an AML only and redo the AML only, pulling through the information, checking company's office, and then suggesting based on what you did previously, here's what you need to do this time for IDVs, etc. But at the same time, allowing you the latitude to make changes to those defaults. So that is what the 2Shakes ongoing customer due diligence would be like for AML only. And at that point, I'm going to pretty much say for people who are just interested in AML only and they're not really getting into the agreements and renewals and stuff, absolutely feel free to duck out if you like, guys. And then I'll just switch back over into the presentation and we'll pick up part 2. Okay, and thanks a lot, guys, for attending, and we will be making this available on our website as well. Okay, cheers. I'll just switch back and then we'll get into part 2, which is renewals of a sign up with AML. So, as I said, part 2 now is ongoing customer due diligence for sign up and AML. Now, with sign up and AML, we're doing a renewal of the agreement. we're reviewing any authorities that we might not have and we might need to capture. That's going to be looking at the services and fees and what you're charging. It's going to be looking at your terms and conditions. The government authorities side, obviously we're going to do an ongoing customer due diligence with AML and sign up as a demonstration, and then we'll get into the Q&A and we'll look at any further resources. So really, this is something that when we first started, and it feels like a long time ago, 6 years or so ago, onboarding compliance, really nobody was talking about it. But if you think about it, when you take on a new customer, it isn't just the AML side, it's about all of the compliance that you need to think about when you're onboarding that client. Now, that might be for your professional bodies to comply with, for instance, CANS or ATTAINS or the ICNZB. It might be to comply with law society rules. You might be a real estate agent who's also using it and you need to comply with RINs or RIANs. And you've got all of those things that's going on that you need to do is when you're onboarding, as well as obviously doing your AML side of it and capturing authority to act. And there's a whole bunch of compliance around capturing authority to act on somebody's behalf at government. So really what 2Shakes is doing here with the agreement, the authorities and the AML customer due diligence is looking at all of that onboarding compliance, and we're going to go through that as a renewal with ongoing customer due diligence bundled in. Plus, the other side of it, which is a bit different to onboarding compliance, is about how it just makes good business sense. So when you're doing work for a customer, and we hear this a lot, you get an agreement signed off first, and then it might be years and you don't upgrade the agreement, you don't update the services and fees, you don't upsell or cross-sell the different things that you can do. You might have brought on new services that your client isn't even aware of. And you know, there's a bit of research that has been done on this. If you're acquiring new customers, it's expensive and it's time consuming. And actually attracting new customers is 5 times more expensive than keeping existing customers. And your existing customers are much more likely to try new products from you because they already have that trusting relationship with you. So it's a little bit looking after your customers. The other side of it is responding to them, because customers change, and At has done a lovely graphic here, and I'm sure a lot of you will be thinking back to your childhood on this one. But basically customers do change. Sometimes they do want more of your services and they might just not know that you do it. It's always a good idea to have that review, talk to them and explain what you do now rather than what you did a year or 2 or 3 ago. Sometimes they can be a little bit difficult and they've given you a bit of a stomach ache and they need to be dealt with, and you know, that's a kind of offboarding procedure. Not so much what we're doing here, but you know, we thought we would mention it because sometimes the important thing is just dealing with the customers that you want to have. Hopefully, with your help as a professional intermediary, your customers are going to grow and become beautiful butterflies. But remember, if you're not responding to their needs and you're not listening to them and keeping that engagement going, then they might see something elsewhere that they would prefer and they might fly away. So it's about responding to your customers. So it's why it just makes good business sense doing these renewals. You need to do your ongoing due diligence so you can do it at the same time. So when you're updating your agreement, you're going to look at your services and fees, and that will come through in 2Shakes. You can add or remove or change. You just want it to reflect the current work. Now, in a renewal, your services and fees, because you can change them and you've edited them for that specific customer, we pull them through from the previous agreement. We don't pull them through from the profile, they're pulled through from the previous agreement and you edit them from there. So that's an important thing to be aware of, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. Terms and conditions, if they're updated in the profile, they will pull through. So any updates to your terms and conditions in your profile will get pulled through to your renewal agreement. And the other thing to think about there is the authorities that you need. By default, government authorities are turned off in a renewal, and it's important if you're doing a renewal and you haven't got all those authorities that you're turning on the ones you need. Now, I've said here that we'd love your input. The way 2Shakes works just now, like I said, your services and fees, your starting point is the previous agreement, but the terms and conditions get pulled through. Now, We'd like to maybe make that a little bit better and give you some options there. Potentially, you might want the services and fees pulled through from your profile or from the previous agreement. So if there's things in there that you find that you think, oh, this would be better if, then please let us know if you've got any feedback on that, and we'd love to hear from you. The last thing I mentioned is just the government authority. 2Shakes, you can get Inland Revenue, ACC, and Companies Office. Now, as I mentioned, by default on a renewal, they're off because we don't really want to be spamming government. You can turn on if you need to complete your compliance. A lot of times people are doing renewals because they've found, maybe from a visit from a government agency, that they don't have all of the authorities easily surfaceable, and so they'll do renewals and get a lot of that stuff done at the same time. So that's really all I wanted to talk about in terms of doing a renewal. You know that you need to look at your services and fees, your authorities, your terms and conditions, make sure that's all okay. And we're now going to look at a bit of a step-by-step in terms of how you would do a renewal, bundling in the AML ongoing customer due diligence and doing it all in one big hit, obviously in 2Shakes. Okay, so in this demo, again, we're just going to get an agreement for renewal. We're going to go through the services and fees. We might increase the fees. We might have pulled through some terms and conditions changes, and we're going to make sure that we've got everybody up to date on biometric IDVs. So let's get started on that. Right, I've just jumped back into the 2Shakes training environment again, and we're just now going to go through that renewal with AML. To be honest, it's also a renewal without AML if you decide that you just need to do a renewal. But since this is an ongoing customer due diligence webinar, I'm focusing on renewing the agreement and doing ongoing customer due diligence at the same time. Now, we just did the Team IM in the previous demo, and that was for AML only. This Renew Limited is the one that we're going to be focusing on with the sign up and AML. So I'm going to go back to where we started, that Ongoing CDD report under the AML drop-down. I'll look for my Ongoing CDD report. I did set it to 24 months last time. It remembers that I've got it set it to 24 months. And I can see renew there. Now you can see there that the Team IM one, which is on there, I can see that I've already started doing my ongoing CDD. It's already showing me that I'm kind of working through it again. Hopefully you can see that those double arrows nicely. And if I click on this now, it will take me to the updated, most recent one that I'm in the middle of renewing. So that's just something to be aware of. But we'll jump into renew. I've done a similar thing here, where I've got a couple of people, it doesn't have the manual one, but I've got a couple of people in here that are biometric and an electronic. So we know when we get to that ID page, we're going to keep the biometric for Sue, and that's also going to be redo the PEP check. And for Guy, the electronic ID is going to default to upgrading it to a biometric in order to meet those new guidelines. And I know I keep going on about them, but they are a big deal, and it's just really important for everybody to if you've got one takeaway from this, we will upgrade those electronics to biometric unless you tell the system not to. Okay, so we'll have a quick look down here. We want to re-engage them. One, it might be part of my professional standards that I need to re-engage my client every X years. It might just be, I really want to make sure my fees are up to date, that my services are reflective of the services I'm providing the client. And I might have made some changes to my terms and conditions over the last year or two, and I just want to make sure that that's updated too. So if I can go into my due diligence, much as what we said before, I can perform ongoing due diligence. If they've left, I can turn it off. Up here, there's also the option to renew stroke OCDD. These two buttons kick off the same flow. So whether you're down here and you want to perform ongoing due diligence, or whether you're here and you want to renew and do ongoing CDD, you're just going to create a new copy of the agreement, and it'll allow you to do the due diligence at the same time. So let's kick it off. As before, it's going to put a note into the notes and files on this client to link it to say, hey, we've renewed this and there's a new one, and they'll link together in the dashboard. So we proceed. It takes us through to the first page, and we can see the client is Sue and it's Renew Limited. I'm not going to mess about too much with who the clients are and everything, but you can edit that a bit in here, which is pretty useful. Then we would go into the services and fees. Now, I might say provide a package of services and fees. I might not have said some of these checked. I might want to update. Now, like I said, this comes from the previous agreement. So if you had turned some of these off or you changed the text or whatever, it's going to show you what you did previously for Renew Limited for services and fees. And we might be turning a few things off because we want to be very explicit, we're no longer doing that for you. Or we might be adding some things on that hadn't been ticked. So you just update your services. The fees here, I put in at $75 an hour. We might be upping that to $80 an hour or whatever. Again, that's going to pull through from the fees section of the previous agreement. The terms and conditions, they're going to pull from the profile. So if you've updated your terms and conditions in the business profile, the new agreement will pick up those new terms and conditions. That's really important. Like I mentioned, the government authorities side, they are turned off by default, so that we're not spamming government agencies and stuff with information that they've already got. But for instance, if you needed to get Inland Revenue Authority because you don't have it for somebody, you would just go in there and select it. You pick that up as you go. It's there if you need it, but it's turned off by default. Then we go to the AML page. Now this is open by default if you've previously done AML. If I hadn't previously done AML, it would have been turned off by default up here. Now I can see, similar to the previous example, Sue and Guy we'd previously done as people for ID, but the company's office search shows Sue, Hyang and Guy, so we've added automatically Hyang into the picture. So we've now got 3 people for ID verification, and much as I did on the previous demo, again we can just have a look through the nature and purpose. We can update these with anything else that we need. The risk assessment, we're going to just make sure that that's still current, it still makes sense, and we might make a little note in about no change or whatever. There's no trust in this one. I've kept it a little bit simpler, but if there were any trusts, we would have a look at that information and just make sure that it's up to date. Ask them if there's been any variations, any change in trustees, all that type of thing. And when we proceed through, much as we did before, but slightly different here, because we've got people who are signing and being ID verified, this is like the other screen for AML only. It's just got a bit of extra information. So here we've got people from the existing agreement, and there's Sue, who was a biometric with electronic. So we're keeping the biometric with electronic and we're redoing the PEP check. Sue is also the only person who signed before. She's signing later via email. Guy previously was an electronic ID, so that's just been upgraded to a biometric, and the PEP check is being included in the ID verification. And then you've got the additional person that's been added to the agreement. So here we've got Hyang, who's been added. We can have them sign, or we can say, actually, I'm just going to ID verify, and I'll just for simplicity's sake, we'll just say ID verify. But these are the sort of things that we can change to make sure that the system can do the things that we want it to do. And then I would put in, I'll just put myself again, I'll always do that. And by default, that's a biometric ID that we're going to be doing for Hyang. So at this point, when I hit proceed, for Sue, much as like previously, because it was a biometric, we're going to keep the biometric but redo the PEP. Sue is also signing the agreement via email. With Guy, the electronic ID is going to instead be upgraded to a biometric with electronic, and that PEP check is included. And for Hyang, who's been added, we're only going to do IDV on Hyang. We're happy with Sue as being the one who's signing, and that is defaulted to a biometric. So when we hit proceed to signing, that all goes out. For Sue, the signing is pending, but the ID has been done and we've redone that PEP. For Guy and Hyang, the IDs will be pending, and it's exactly what we would have seen before. As soon as Sue has signed it and we've got the other IDs and things, we create the agreement just like before, the PDF, all signed, and all of the IDs are done. So that, hopefully, I won't go into every single feature. I'll really try to focus on the changes with Ongoing CDD. Hopefully that will give you an idea of when you're doing a renewal with Ongoing CDD, you can still add people in for the company's office. You can update your risk assessment, your nature and purpose. You can add and remove beneficial owners. And then when it comes to the IDs, we can guide you in terms of what's best to meet the guidance, but you can still make your own choices as you go based on what works best for you. So I'll just close that out and then I'll pop back to my slides and we'll continue on the last little bit. Right, I'm back in my slides now. We just got some further resources here. There is the DIA website. Most of the reporting entities that use 2Shakes currently have DIA as their supervisor. Really good place to go for frequently asked questions. There's also Section 31 of the Act. You can find that online at legislation.gov.nz. And there's also a lot of information on the 2Shakes online support. On our website, we have a support area, and we've got a whole bunch of information on ongoing CDD and renewals. So definitely worth having a look at that too. So I'm just going to wrap up by thanking everybody for watching. As far as questions go on the webinar, because we're posting this online, on the webinar there were a couple of questions and a couple of points people made that would be worth mentioning. One, just remember each of those renewals or ongoing CDD records in 2Shakes is its own snapshot in time, linked to a chain of other ones that are their own snapshot in time. That is incredibly important for your auditing, and it is also important when you're going through a renewal or an ongoing customer due diligence to make notes as you go. Even if nothing has changed, an auditor will be looking to see that you've reviewed it and that you're still happy with it. So whether that's in notes and files or the specific areas such as nature and purpose and risk assessment, make sure you add some notes as you go through. So thanks very much. This was our coffee webinar on ongoing customer due diligence, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.